This episode is brought to you by LifeLock. It's tax season, and we're all a bit tired of numbers. But here's one you need to hear. $16.5 billion. That's how much the IRS flagged for possible identity fraud last year. Now here's a good number. 100 million. That's how many data points LifeLock monitors every second. If your identity is stolen, they'll fix it, guaranteed. Save up to 40% your first year at LifeLock.com/podcast. Terms apply.
It was really an awakening moment. All these things that I was leading towards, what I believed to be a successful life, the hard driving, gotta win, all that kind of stuff. It did seem like winning to get great grades and SAT scores and get into all these places and work at the accounting firm. And it came to this screeching halt when I got to that job and I realized this is not something that I want really my life to look like.
Welcome to the Parent Footprint Podcast with Dr. Dan. I'm Dr. Dan, your host. And let me tell you a little bit about the mission of Parent Footprint. It is to make the world a more loving and compassionate place, one parent and one child at a time. We believe the key to raising happy, healthy, and engaged kids is for us parents to seek the same in our own lives: happiness, health, and engagement. Critically, we believe that awareness is the foundation for your vision of successful parenting, and with increased awareness and intention, we can be purposeful about leaving a healthy footprint on our children. Today's show is completely aligned with this mission. Today's show is called Teaching Financial Independence to Your Children, and I am excited to introduce you to our guest, Brad Barrett. I'm going to talk a bit about Brad first, because there's a lot we need to know as for the life that he's created. Brad went from being a full-time CPA to retiring with complete financial independence by the age of 35 through diligent savings and investing. And now as co-host and co-founder of ChooseFI, he's empowering others to reach for a life of purpose, intention, and ultimately happiness through the journey to financial independence. So a little bit about the story here that he's going to tell us more about. He led an outwardly successful life in his 20s, succeeded in school, went to an elite university, top job at an international accounting firm, CPA, and he had the usual plan of the American narrative. In his first year, he saw that success was really working over 80 hours a week and not taking vacations, which I know is familiar to many of us. So he looked for a different path, and he and his wife had this epiphany that they would want to have kids, but with high pressure jobs in a high cost of living area, they wouldn't have time or the freedom they desire to spend with those kids. So I'm going to welcome him, and he's going to tell us the rest of the story. Brad, welcome to the show.
Dan, thank you so much for having me.
So continue this story, please, because it's an inspiring one, and it gives hope to everyone out there that they can do what you have done.
Yeah. Well, no, I certainly appreciate it. And that was a great summary. I'm going to have to record that and play it back for people. But yeah, I mean, that clearly, that's the start of this. It was really an awakening moment that all these things that I was leading towards my entire life, and like you said, leading what I believe to be a successful life. And maybe for that type A personality that I used to be, the hard driving, gotta win, all that kind of stuff. Like, it did seem like winning to get great grades and SAT scores and get into all these places and, work at the accounting firm. And it came to this screeching halt when I got to that job and I realized this is not something that I want really my life to look like. When I looked at the partners, right? When you work at a big accounting firm or law firm or investment bank, there's always that carrot of making partner or making managing director or some such. And I looked at those people and they were miserable. Sure, they were making a lot of money, but the partner was there with me, the first year staff, at 2 a.m. stapling tax returns, right? Like that wasn't a life that I wanted. And you really, you combine it with a couple of things that again, I had this awakening of, wow, I'm never going to be able to take off more than maybe 9 calendar days in a row, because who can take off more than a week of work, right? So you get 1 week and bookended by 2 weekends, and you've got 9 calendar days. And that just, it seemed like a sentence. And I don't mean to over dramatize this, certainly, but that's what it seemed like. And I just kind of realized there had to be a better way. And my wife and I, we got married in our mid-20s. We lived in a high cost of living area. We lived in Long Island, New York. And that was where we had grown up. That's where we lived our entire lives, had our family and friends. And we made the decision at that point that it wasn't going to be congruent with the life that we wanted to live. And honestly, I don't know how we had the mental wherewithal at 25 and 26 to realize that. But I mean, that path that we set up at that age came to fruition. That's the remarkable thing. And a lot of it did stem from making a fairly radical decision to leave Long Island and move down to Richmond, Virginia. And I mean, really here in Richmond, it's a wonderful place to live. And it probably cost about a third, maybe 40% of what it would have on Long Island. I mean, everything is cheaper, obviously, most especially housing, clearly, but everything across the board is cheaper. And we don't feel like we've given up anything. I think a lot of people look at saving money as deprivation, and that has never been the case for us. We've always looked at it both as this kind of fun game, if you will, this way to kind of win at life, right? Like live the same middle class or upper middle class life as everybody else around us, but yet we're saving 30 or 50 or 70% of our income. And to all outward appearances, nobody knows. Nobody would have any clue on my block that we were saving 50% of our money. And, there was not only that, but clearly the goal of having Laura stay at home with our kids and be a stay-at-home mom was something that was important to her. She's done that. And, my youngest daughter's now in 2nd grade, and Laura's the PTA treasurer. And I mean, that worked. And the ultimate goal was getting to this point of financial independence. And yeah, really incredibly, we did get there in our mid-30s. So
a number of things you just said are striking to me. One is the awareness, the epiphany. And this show, our mission is all about increasing awareness so we can live with intention, which is also clearly your goal personally and professionally. And I've seen from a generational perspective, the millennials, whatever else everyone's being called these days, they seem to have more awareness than our generation. And I'm 49 now with teenagers and young adults, so I think I'm a little older than you, but I feel like we sound like we're from a similar mindset generation. But you guys in your to me, this is early that you came to this awareness. And I just taking a step back. How do you think you guys had that awareness at that age?
Yeah, I mean, that is hard. It's hard to place ourselves because Laura and I have had these conversations, and it almost seems like we just came to this idea all at once, but clearly it wasn't that, right? Like it was especially on the job. Like I said, there were those 2 items, but actually we worked at Arthur Andersen. And if you remember back in 2001, so I graduated college in 2001 and went to work for what at the time was the best accounting firm in the world. And then 9 months later, it did not exist. And I think what happened was we realized there is great uncertainty and impermanence in modern, I guess, not only American life, but corporate life, certainly, that like you could have done everything right. I mean, again, there were partners there that had worked their entire careers, got to be partner at Arthur Andersen, and the firm did not exist a couple months later. And I think what we realized at that point was that there's always going to be some outside force that is going to have the ability to impact you. But if you can take matters into your own hands and increase the level of autonomy and power that you have in even little ways, it's going to help you. It's going to give you options, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's something that we realized early on was, what is the way to give ourselves options? It's to have money in the bank, right? I mean, think about, there were people there, and of course, I'm just using this one simple little example because it's my life, but you see this all the time. There are people, many, many tens of millions of people who are living paycheck to paycheck. And if they lose their job or their company goes out of business or whatever scenario you want to paint, which could very plausibly happen at any point, their entire lives crumble potentially in 30, 60, 90 days, right? I mean, think about the stress that you're living under, your entire family's living under, when your entire lifestyle can crumble and your entire life can crumble in 30 to 60 days. I mean, that seemed like just the height of insanity to me. And especially because it hit home so young for us. Really at that point, we were 22 and 23. And this was even before we were dating. So I think that type of uncertainty really, really stuck itself in our brains, if you will. And I think that helped inform everything that came later.
And it just also shows how external events collide with internal development and processing, right? So if that earthquake, so to speak, didn't happen right then, you might have maybe it takes another year or two of being really tired, wanting vacation, to be like, hey, this is not a way to live, right? So it's kind of like everything aligned for you. It sounds like, to have this, whoa, we got to do this thing differently. And we can, and we have options, right? Options.
Yeah, I mean, that's absolutely right, with options and just realizing that how you spend your money, like, it really does impact. It's not just an in the moment decision, right? Because I mean, so many of my friends and colleagues, they, even at 22, 23, they bought BMWs. And it's not like, it's not my place to say like, oh, you shouldn't buy things. Again, FI is not about deprivation, but I mean, that was it. It was almost paralyzing for them going forward when you have a $500, $700, $900 a month car payment. Like, by not mooring ourselves to these like expensive things, we did give ourselves options. So, it's funny because optionality is something I've always considered. And sometimes those options that you exercise will be small. And sometimes, like in my case, they'll be big, moving 400 miles south. I mean, like, that wasn't an easy decision. And certainly to follow a path towards financial independence, you don't have to make dramatic decisions. You genuinely do not, but you have to make some decisions, right, Dan? I think, like, for so many people who are living paycheck to paycheck, or worse, getting into further debt every month, you're never going to get to a point of solvency, not less any type of financial independence, or ever be able to retire other than through sheer luck. And I mean, that's not good enough, right? So I think that's why saving money, it does give you options, and it gives you a level of control over your life. And frankly, it lowers your stress level dramatically. Like, the thought of living that life so close to the edge, where like any little pseudo emergency, which is really just life, it's not even an emergency, right? Like a flat tire or a broken stove, whatever it may be. Like, if that's an emergency that you have to put it on a credit card at 20% interest, like, think about how stressful that life is.
Yeah, I know it well, living in the Bay Area in Northern California, just clients and friends and our own experience. It's, people are, quote, successful and stressed out for all the reasons you just mentioned. So the point of this show is, how do we teach our kids about financial independence? But of course, the Parent Footprint, it's all about us parents leading by example and becoming aware. So let's start with where you've been going. Is like, what do adults need to know about your model to financial independence?
Yeah, I think the first thing, honestly, is that you can't beat yourself up about past mistakes. I think that's what a lot of people do, and they stick their head in the sand. We see this all the time. Like, people are just so afraid of thinking about their financial lives because they feel like they don't know anything, or they've made so many mistakes, or it's hopeless. And we've seen so many people in our community change their lives dramatically. And like, it doesn't matter if you start like me in our early to mid 20s. It doesn't matter if we have people starting over at 50, and it's still the same math at the end of the day. So I would urge everybody to say, like, if you're writing this off as, oh, that's not for me, I think we've seen stories of people from all walks of life who have tried to really transform their lives radically. But, the funny thing, Dan, is like, it seems outwardly radical, but like, once you start doing this, like, again, it becomes this fun game. So anyway, so that's kind of like the background, I would say.
Yep.
But I think the very next step is you need to be honest with yourself. You need to, maybe for the first time in your life, put your financial life on paper or on Excel or Google Sheets or whatever it may be. Get it in front of you. And that might be difficult, right? Psychologically. I mean, well, like, that might be extraordinarily difficult, but you have to just be honest and get it there and say, like, all right, this is step one. I'm not going to beat myself up over the mistakes I made. That is a sunk cost. Like, I cannot do anything about that anymore. I can make steps every day forward to make my life a little bit better, right? And I can't beat myself up. So I think that is what I advise everybody. And I think it does. I love how aligned our missions are here. Is it comes from this place of intention. You have to take action. Like I said before, nothing is going to change if you're living paycheck to paycheck and you're just hoping, right? Like, that is not a strategy. Hope is not a strategy here. You need to determine what you can change in your life to make that little bit of space, right? You have your income and you have your expenses. It's a real simple equation. And the difference is your savings. Ultimately, it's this gap. And I think you have to make some decisions. And we like to say it's based on value. So again, I know I kind of said jokingly the BMW before, but frankly, if you are a car person and you love your cars, then spend money on it, but do it from a place of intention. Just don't do it unconsciously like so many people, or to even worse, to keep up with the neighbors or some silly nonsense like that. Do it from a place of intention. So this is not about being a miser. It's not about scrimping and saving every penny. I mean, my wife and I literally just got home before we hit record on this from CrossFit. And that's something we do together now as almost like a 3-time a week date, if you will. And 9:30 in the morning, Monday, Wednesday, Friday. And it's fantastic. And CrossFit is not cheap. It's $150 per person per month, but we value that. So we spend, right? So what I would say is, look at once you've put your financial life, and that is your income, your expenses, what you owe and what you own, right? So your net worth in essence. And you're going to look at those expenses and your income and say, all right, what can change here, right? So I think for me personally, I like to get quick wins because I think, and obviously you're the expert here, so you can speak more eloquently on this. But I think psychologically, when you get that win and you see positive momentum, that you want to do more, and it's just, oh, this is part of my life now. It's habitual, right? So I think the expenses are always going to be the easier side of the equation to tackle, especially at the very beginning. I mean, I think for a lot of people, if they could make more money, in all likelihood, they would be, at their current job, or, maybe they could get a side hustle like a Uber or Lyft or something like that. That may be a bit extreme, but I suspect there are ways to increase your income in the short to medium term. But again, I like to personally focus on expenses at the very beginning, because I think there's almost invariably going to be something you can cut, again, to get that quick win. And it might even just be, all right, we go out to eat 20 times a month, right? Like at an extreme, let's go out 19 next month. That's a huge win. That's $50, right? Like, or $70, whatever it may be. Like, So,
Well, I remember my epiphany. Sorry to interrupt here. I remember my epiphany. It sounds so simple as you say it, and as I'm about to say it, when I realized that not spending money and cutting costs was the same thing and easier than making more money and working more.
Yeah.
It's like the same thing on the spreadsheet. Like it's what's left, right?
Yeah.
It's like, whoa, how come we don't get this information?
Right.
But now we're getting it now.
No, and yeah, I would even go a step further. So like that is a brilliant realization. And you realize actually that you're spending with post-tax dollars, right? So that money's already been taxed. So it's actually worth probably 1.3, times, if you will, on your gross income. So like it's even more valuable in that sense. And actually the second point is when your life costs less, you simply don't need as much money to cover your entire lifestyle, which is interestingly enough, the entire concept of financial independence, which is in essence to have enough money saved up over whatever time period. It might take you 15, 20, 25 years, whatever it may be, to reach this point of financial independence. And that's largely irrelevant, but it's predicated on your savings rate. But you need to, in essence, cover your yearly expenses. And I think this is where a lot of retirement calculators that you see online get it entirely incorrect. They start with your current income when that's largely irrelevant, because in order to get to any point of retirement, early or not, you need to have some savings, right? And some significant savings built into your income. So I think it's a fundamentally flawed way to start, actually. So what you really, truly need is to cover your yearly expenses. So by lowering your expenses, you are increasing that gap. You're increasing your savings during this accumulation phase. And then you're also reducing the overall cost of your life. So you need less. So it's a double benefit.
And gosh, it sounds so simple. And I have to say that one of the points that you make, which cannot be overstated, is the courage it takes to sit down and really look at everything, because it can be scary when you're overwhelmed with money in, money out, everything that's coming at you. We all as humans like to, brush things under the couch and under the rug, and time goes on. But if you could just sit down and do it and breathe through it, there's only good stuff that's going to come out on the other end.
Yeah, agreed. I've seen it over and over with people in our community, and yeah, it is difficult. It's daunting, but just have the courage and take that leap. I've seen myself. It's led to this incredible life. So it has to start somewhere.
And then after it starts with you and after you achieve it or are on your way to achieving, as us parents, what then do you start and how do you start teaching your children?
Yeah, this has really been interesting for us. And my wife, Laura, and I look at this education process for our children as really our life's goal at this point. And it's just so remarkable. I have two, I guess, not so young daughters. It's funny. In my head, I think of them as young daughters, but they're 11 and 8 now. So, still young-ish. But I think the very first thing we do is we talk about money, and we don't make it a taboo subject. So many people, I mean, I know when I grew up, my parents didn't talk about money at all. It was something that it's almost like the, sex, religion, and money, right? Like the things you don't talk about. And I think just having open and honest conversations with your kids, it really, really helps. And we've seen our kids be interested. Now, obviously, we're not sitting down with them and showing them our tax returns and going through calculations on taxation and other nonsense like this. Like you have to give the lessons where they're appropriate, and you gauge your kids' interests, right? But we feel that savings rate is absolutely essential. Like saving money and just building a habit of saving money is crucial. So what we've done is, we give an allowance. We don't tie it to chores, but it's just it's really to teach them about money. So essentially what we do is they have 3 buckets, and I'm sure you've heard this before, but they have the savings bucket, they have a spending bucket, and they have a charity bucket. And we anchor, what we try to do in both with our ChooseFI podcast and with our family is we try to anchor a 50% savings rate. And I know that a lot of people's minds are probably blown right now. That sounds astronomical, especially if you certainly live in a high cost of living area. But I think if you start with that, even if you don't reach it, right? Even if you only, I say that jokingly, like only had a 25% or 30% savings rate, like it's still remarkable. So I think
yeah, yes.
Yeah, I mean, we try to. So I think we try to start from there. So that's essentially what we do with our kids too. We're trying to build that habit, and so 50% of their allowance goes directly into that savings, and then the rest of it is essentially split between spending and charity. And I think it is important to know that, especially for your kids, like life is not about being miserly. That's not it at all. I mean, we are enjoying our lives as much as you could imagine. We feel like we're rolling in abundance in essence, and yet we're saving all this money. So I think it really is important that they realize, okay, I want to buy that item and I get X number of dollars per month or per week for spending. It's going to take me 9 or 11 weeks, whatever it may be, right? Depending on the math. Like, I think that's a cool thing. And then they decide in that interim time period also, is it really worth it? Have my desires moved on? Like we've seen that with them recently. They were playing these intricate like worlds they built up with Legos, and they were buying these Lego dolls, which are not all that cheap, actually, interestingly enough. But they have like, I think they each have, it's something like 27 of them. So they have 54 different characters with all these different attributes and all this. And so it's this amazing thing. But just in the last couple of weeks, they've moved on, and they were planning on saving up for like this $100 set of these dolls, and they've moved on. So it's interesting. I think that's another kind of cool lesson built in there. And yeah, I mean, that's kind of where we started. And then you layer the lessons on from there. So we don't want them to just stick their savings literally in a bucket or in a checking account or a tiny little savings account making, 0.1% interest or something. We try to explain to them roughly, very roughly, of course, how the stock market works and how over a 50, I mean, they legitimately have a 70 to 90 year investing lifetime, what that's going to look like, right? And the power of compounding. And we actually, again, you layer on lessons, but you think about who is it applicable for? Like at the time, my younger daughter, Molly, was 6, and she would not have understood anything about compound interest. But my older daughter, Anna, who loves math, we sat her down for 5 minutes in front of a Microsoft Excel sheet and just showed her the concept of compounding and how when you invest X number of dollars per year and it grows at, let's say, 8%, how that can grow really exponentially with the power of compounding as opposed to just a straight line thing, or even worse, just taking your interest and spending it, right? So, I mean, she looked at that and her eyes, it was like this seminal moment in her life. And again, like that's something that if you had asked me prior to that, like, is Anna, is this going to be a big deal, or is she just going to look at it and say, forget about it? Like, I probably would have thought the latter. And yet I strongly suspect that's going to be one of those moments she looks back on and says, that was a really important lesson for me.
And, that's reminding me of the guy who wrote the book or the article about compound. It was, if you don't get your Starbucks latte, like one day a week for 30 years and take that money, like it compounded to over $1 million, just that $4 latte, right? And most adults don't get it until they actually have it explained to them. So this is huge.
Yeah, agreed. Compound interest, for anybody out there listening, like I don't want to make it sound like this is something obvious because it isn't. I didn't know anything about it until I basically got lucky and someone presented it to me. So what I would request everybody listening to this, if you've never heard of that before, is just Google compound interest calculator and just put in some figures. So in essence, like put in that you're going to save, I don't know, $3,000 or $4,000 a year for the next 30 years. It's going to grow at 8%, and see what that number is. Your mind is going to be blown. And it shows the power of compounding. It is a transformative concept.
My wife and I, in thinking about this with our kids, a large part of our discussion over the years has been teaching them about advertising and about how the industries that are out there to make us spend money. And I'm wondering what you think about that in terms of educating on the flip side of having that impulse control, that delayed gratification, being informed consumers, because particularly as technology and as our kids have smartphones and everything's popping up on the computers, which is like spend money, spend money, spend money. And I feel like this is another side of the awareness that kids need to have.
Yeah, that is a good point. And I actually wouldn't mind asking you a question, which is we've noticed our kids are very different when it comes to advertising. One of our children is just not interested at all, whereas the other one sees something, is like, oh, can we buy that? Can we buy that? Like that, exactly to your point. Like, do you notice that your kids are different?
Yes, they are, depending on just their personalities. And so, yeah, one of our three definitely is always the critic and always seeing the angle that is coming on the other side. Another one is a big saver, always been a big saver, very methodical. And another one gets really excited when they find something that they really want. So within this context, we are been working on money and different accounts and how much do you make and how much after taxes will you have, and is this something that you want? And then learning over time as well, the difference between something that makes you feel really good in the moment, and then you're like, oh gosh, I just spent all that money and I got kind of suckered. I don't even really want it. So I feel the dialogue, kind of what you're talking about with money with your kids, it's the dialogue which is so important, and the lessons where you can be like, okay, we just learned a lesson, now let's move on. Right? Like we know how this works.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And yeah, built in there, you were talking about a lesson that we pass to them often, which is experiences versus stuff, right? Like we love to travel. We think it's an amazing thing for them to see the world, to see that their own little myopic world here in Richmond is not the larger world. There's culture out there. There are people, there are things to explore. And I think we put a focus on travel and we don't put a focus on stuff. So that's something that's really, really important for us. I think, again, kind of going back to your question about how do we deal with advertising? I mean, I'm not like especially proud of this, but like, avoidance for us is some aspect of this. Like, and it's not that it's been overt, but like we don't watch that much TV. We really don't. So, I mean, my kids are not the ones who are bombarded with all these ads constantly. Like, so whereas a lot of their friends have these long, intricate wish lists for the holidays, like our kids, frankly, don't have that because I don't know that they even know what's out there. So like, they're not necessarily getting that desire every second of every day being bombarded at them. And I think, what's interesting is we've built a structure where they have some ability certainly to make choices. Like we were talking about, they're spending money and, like we talked about with the Legos, but my wife, Laura, also is very intentional about what she allows them to choose, because I think she believes that, I'm kind of struggling to find the words here, but she believes that a lot of extra choice leads to just wanting more. So like she has, friends of hers who they're always like taking their kids for like new shoes. And invariably the kid chooses the $70 shoes that light up and have little skates in them and all this other nonsense. Whereas Laura's like, why would I give Molly and Anna the choice to do that when like I'm just looking for things that I know look good, are going to be suitable for them and last a while, and I'm going to find a good deal on. So like in that regard, it's kind of creating this structure where the wants are minimized, but clearly like we're not trying to shelter them as and give them no choices or no exposure to the world. I think we're trying to do it intentionally.
You just hit the word that I was going to reflect back to you, which is everything about what you and Laura are doing relates to being intentional. Intentional about what you're teaching, intentional about the choices you're making, intentional about how you're living your life so your kids see this. So intention is huge in all of this.
Yeah, no, I love that. And yeah, I certainly appreciate it. And yeah, just kind of the final thing I have here about teaching our kids is again, going back to that conversation, which is just kind of normalizing the talk about money. And I can think of an example recently where Laura wound up having like all these coupons to Old Navy. She got credit card rewards points, and there was some deal on the website where, it was whatever, 50% off and then free shipping if you spent X amount. And she was able to sit down with the girls while she did this and show them how she, by just being smart, and it comes back to that like winning at this game of life. It's getting the ultimate result that's the same as everybody else that we know, which is getting nice, fashionable clothes, but doing it and really winning. So Laura ultimately wound up, I think, and I'm going to get it wrong to the penny, unfortunately, but it was under $1 that she wound up having to pay out of pocket. I think it was 82 cents if memory serves. And it started at like $117 of actual items. And the cool thing is not just that she saved this money. That's a one-off thing, but she was explaining to the girls the thought process behind it and how if she actually spent a little bit more, she got over that threshold for free shipping. So it wouldn't be $7 in shipping. And then she was able to use this additional coupon because it was a $50 increment and she could get her full value from it. So it was all these little micro lessons built into this fun thing of, hey, we're getting a new wardrobe. So it was just cool experience that I really wanted to make a point of telling you about.
Nice. Well, the intention of our talk and the time of how much we have unfortunately spent takes us to, when I say unfortunately, I want more time, the parent footprint moment question. So I'm sure you have a million examples because of the way you and Laura are living your life. So the question is, tell us about a time when you became aware of yourself as an individual or as a parent, and this new awareness had a positive impact on your children.
Yeah, I think for me, it's a larger journey. So if you'll indulge me here for a second, I can't think of, it's not one moment. It's this path that I've been on, not the financial independence path necessarily, though it certainly coincides with that, but this path of self-improvement, but in a very compassionate way. And I think it's made me a better person. I think it's made me a more present person. I think I know I mentioned before, I was this kind of type A, have to win type person. And that's how I grew up. And I don't know why, frankly, but all those outward marks of success really meant something to me. And they don't anymore. And I think that's enabled me to take a step back and relax and think about what does a good life look like? And frankly, what does a good life look like in this season of my life? And I think things change, things adapt. If we had this conversation 3 years ago, I would have thought that my financial independence life would have been built around travel and exploring and doing all these exciting, like individual moments, that you point to. But I think what we've realized is we like our routine. We like our lives here, and building that life around routine, around playing board games with the girls and making that we probably play 20 board games a week at this point. And, and just having that quality time, I think it is all about this journey that I've been on. And it's just made me a happier, more content person. And I think it has unquestionably made me a better parent.
Inspiring, Brad. That's so inspiring. And I mean, for everyone listening, regardless of your age, you can do this. You really can do this. And I love the question that you posed, like, what does a good life look like? I mean, and that leads to the intention. And also, as we can teach our kids to ask themselves that question at a very early age, so they can make those choices, those intentional choices, even long before we all came to them. Like that's the goal with each generation, right? More wisdom, more intention, more purpose, more meaning. Yeah,
and it's interesting because I have like a direct story that I just thought of actually. If we have one more minute here, is because of this growth mindset that I've built for myself, I've been able to have long conversations with my older daughter Anna about what it looks like to improve, but to improve based on the growth mindset as opposed to just like, I want to win, right? So she is a very competitive swimmer. She's like an excellent swimmer for an 11-year-old. And I think part of her got very used to being a big fish in a small pond, if you will. And, pardon that. But, she was winning all the time at her little local club and her summer club. And now she's at this really incredible, like top-notch USA swimming club. And there are girls all around her who are just frankly better than her right now. I mean, they're some of the best kids in the country. And she at first looked at that and said like, wow, like almost like I'm a loser, right? Like I'm not as good as them. And I think what we did was we built this mindset where she actually now, she came up with this concept and I had nothing to do with it. She said to me one day, she's like, Daddy, I think of this now as building a brick in my wall. Okay. Building a brick in my wall. And it's the wall of success. So it's, what's the one thing I can do today to build that brick? All right. So that is not going to be like, I mean, she knows she's not going to be a better swimmer than those 4 kids in the next lane who are just frankly better than her right now. But she does know that if she can build one brick that day and every subsequent practice, what is that going to look like 3, 5, 7 years from now? And it's just so cool. Like, and these bricks are tiny, right? It's like, okay, I'm as good as the best breaststroker in the pool for 25 yards. What would it look like to keep up with her for 50? I know I can't for 100, but what if my brick today is keeping up with her for 50 yards, right? And when you stack these things and think about the visual of that building a brick, and I've taken that in my own life now of like, when I just recently started like weightlifting, and I'm down in my basement doing like heavy squats. And this is something that does not come naturally to me at all. And I'm thinking about what is the brick I can build in my wall that day. And I got that language from my, at the time, 10-year-old daughter.
Wow. Okay. So we are going to leave everyone with this question, because before the question was, what does a good life look like? The next question is, what's the next brick you can build in your wall?
That's so great.
I love it. You got to tell your daughter, we are going to use this to inspire others to do the same. So cool.
Love it.
So
love
cool.
it. Love it.
All right, Brad, tell people tell them about your podcast and everywhere else they could follow all of your information.
Great.
And
well, I
wisdom.
appreciate it. Yeah. So obviously, if you're listening to this podcast, you have a podcast player. So just search for ChooseFI for financial independence. So ChooseFI. We'd love for you to hit subscribe. Listen to episode 100 first. That's a great place to start. Also, ChooseFI.com/start. is another good way to just kind of start with our entire ecosystem. And yeah, we actually have ChooseFI local groups in about 300 cities all across the world. So if you're looking for a support structure for a community, ChooseFI is there. And it's really, really exciting. So yeah, that's just at ChooseFI.com/local. Nice.
So much information. And I love that you've built communities, right? Communities of support for people who are aligned with living this life that they want. And everyone that is fully aligned with our mission at Parent Footprint, you know where to find us at www.parentfootprint.com. Think about the person you want your child to become. Be that person. Live intentionally, live with purpose, and ask yourself that question that I ask myself daily: what footprint do you want to leave?